I was absolutely criticized by everybody. Everybody in my life was like, what are you doing, man? Like, that was probably the ultimate life-changing experience to that point in my life, where I understood, like, wow, okay, like, doing hard things is really important, because I learned so much about rejection, about just being mentally resilient, about adversity, right? About how, like, making money, and then, like, the classic burnout when you make money and then blow it all and then stall out and zero for a while. Like, I learned a lifetime of sales lessons in one summer, which was badass.
Problems are what? Problems are profits!
All right, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Problems or Profits podcast. My name is Rebecca Lynn Matheson, and I'm joined here by Matt McKeever. We are your hosts for today's episode, and we're going to be talking to a very special guest, Adam J.D. Martin. Now, Matt and I have both worked very closely with Adam in our wholesaling business and beyond. So it's going to be really great to dive into some different concepts with Adam about his upbringing and how he has turned a lot of different problems into profits throughout his lifetime and continuously grown, developed, and learned lessons over time. Really excited to have Adam on. So let's talk about problems over profits. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome, Adam. Well, I'd love to start things off with our first warm-up question, which is, what's the most expensive thing you've ever broken?
Most expensive thing I've ever broken. I did a really good job one time in the winter driving home from a funeral, of all things, really ditching my Audi A5. So it was an Audi A5 S-Line Quattro. All was well with the world, except I hadn't yet got around to winter tires, because it was one of those kind of like surprise snowstorms that came out of nowhere early in the season. And I was passing a transport truck on a 2-lane country road. So there was a country ditch. And if you are from the country in Canada, you know what that means. So it was about 8 feet of holy shit. And then, and then actually drove it out the other end of the ditch, which was crazy, but definitely had some body damage and all that good stuff that comes with ditching a car.
Absolutely. Okay. And next question here, Adam, is if you had $1 million and 24 hours only to use that $1 million, what would you do with it?
So it has to be invested in the first 24, or it has to be like totally invested and out?
Yeah, so you can interpret that however you'd like, but basically you no longer have access to that $1 million after the 24 hours. What would you do with it?
Okay, well, given the current set of circumstances in Ontario's real estate market, I think I would approach some heavy investing in a few different real estate assets, both multifamily residential and potentially take on some flip projects.
Awesome. Very boring real estate oriented question. Appreciate it, Adam. And then last question here. Why are you?
I don't know. Like, I think there's probably a long origin story there to unpack, but ultimately I think I'm me because of a series of opportunistic leaps of faith that have brought me to where I am today. So I've taken advantage of being very opportunistic in my life, where I've said yes to a lot of scary shit, like, quitting my job and moving cities to work with Matt McKeever, for example. So a lot of mentorship, a lot of guidance, and an interesting set of circumstances growing up. So I grew up essentially with my grandparents, which led me to have a lot of friends that were in their 40s and 50s at the time, and now are in their 60s and 70s. And so they were often my peer group, but I also had a lot of like athletic studs that I grew up with that were my friend group as well. So I got a very diverse experience growing up, and I think that's largely why I am who I am today.
That's awesome. Well, first question that I actually want to lead with is actually a follow-up question to that. So a few years ago now, you made a very bold decision to drive all the way out to London and talk to this guy named Matt McKeever here and start working for him. So what drives you to have the confidence to make those sorts of bold decisions, and how can others also take that sort of level of action that you've taken in a lot of your business decisions up to this point?
I think I've approached a lot of these decisions from a position of whatever it takes was sort of my mentality at that time. And I was also in a position where I didn't really have a lot to lose. I've always been fairly confident in my abilities to secure another role with regular society. So, at the time I was leaving a sales job that would have easily gotten me, $100,000 a year if I just committed to it properly. And if I stayed there, that would be almost my certain future. But I also knew the ease at which I was able to find myself in those positions where I could accept roles like that. So, the worst case was that I failed doing something that I really wanted to do, trying to take advantage of something I really wanted, versus failing at something I wouldn't even like, right? I'm not sure who it is that we're supposed to be quoting having said that, but there's somebody out there that says, don't fail at doing something you don't like. It just doesn't make any sense. So I've really taken that to heart and taken a whatever it takes approach to life, and it's never treated me bad. I mean, there's been times where I had no money and was definitely terrified, but there's also been times where I wake up and decide it's time for another Rolex, and I can just make it happen. And it's largely a risk management thing. But like, if you don't have a whole lot to lose, like I was 24 when I made that decision to join Matt and just like drop everything. And I didn't have a whole lot to lose at that time, and I was willing to risk it all. And largely I still am, because what's the worst that can happen? If you go all in, the worst that's going to happen is you fail and you learn a shitload about what not to do the second time. And it's way easier to start the second version of something than it ever is to get those first words on the page, right? Or to start a new story. Like, it's very difficult to do that, but the second time around is so easy.
Awesome. So before moving on to the second question there, Adam, I'd like to build upon what you were talking about there first. Or even before I do that, I think it's Jim Carrey's dad. I know in Jim Carrey's commencement speech, he talks about his dad being an accountant and failing at being an accountant when really he wanted to be a comedian. But I'm just trying to, and my memory may be foggy, so maybe this isn't even you, but when you originally joined my team, it was you and Mike that were joining, right?
Yeah.
Were both of you working the shitty contractor job, or was it only Mike that was like in that exact moment working the shitty contractor job? And I guess the reason I bring it up is, to me, that's kind of like, I think like making a profit out of a problem. And so like maybe that was you, maybe it wasn't, but either way, the reason I'm asking, and then I'll kind of like follow up.
Yeah. So initially it was both of us at that moment. I had joined Mike for a brief period of time up north doing some contracting as well, and basically just took off from that sort of six-figure job to get into that and learn those skills. And that was sort of the first leap towards getting into real estate, was just trying to figure out some of these skills, because I thought that was the easiest path, right? Like, that was the path of least resistance, was learn the most basic of the skills.
Yeah. And so I'm glad to bring up this context, just because I think it's important. A lot of people find themselves in kind of like, and so again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way I remember it was you guys kind of went to work up for this contractor or renovator. He wasn't necessarily the nicest gentleman in the world. It wasn't a great work environment. And, a lot of people at that age find themselves in those sort of jobs, right? Like being young 20s or late teens and like working a shitty job for a shitty person that you don't necessarily see a nice ending to that story with. And a lot of people end up just killing time there rather than looking for a new opportunity. And I'd love just to kind of hear your thoughts on, how quickly do you pivot when you find yourself in a problem or a shitty situation?
Yeah, I think now I may have a different perspective than what I did at that exact time, because I actually did let that situation go on for longer than I should have. And the reason I did that is it was under the guise of like, it was under the guise of learning. But it's one of these things where I think in order to make these decisions faster, you need to actually acknowledge and become very honest with yourself about the opportunity cost. So if you're not in like the perfect situation, more often than not, I think you can still go and get those learning opportunities and get those other skill development opportunities, or basically anything that you want from some other opportunity where you actually are happy with the other things. So I think that decision took me like, 2 or 3 months of reasonable agony. And then I made that decision as well to come to London. So like, yeah. And I think today I would be a lot faster to change my situation. And I am a lot faster to change my situation when I find myself in those places, but still at every level, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, what if I don't get this opportunity again? Or, like I have it good. So why would I change? Like, don't fix something that's not necessarily all the way broken, but, sometimes you have to, right? The opportunity cost can be great if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you elaborating on that. So for the second question here, this is going, the goal here is to be an unusual podcast, but I'm going to take it maybe even to another level, just because like I already know a decent amount of your backstory and stuff, Adam. So I'd love to hear like, what's a problem that you turned into a profit that like I wouldn't have heard about, right? Like, because like I know the last couple of years pretty well, I think. But either maybe there's ones that I don't remember or didn't understand the context to, or ones that maybe came up in your epilogue. But what are some of those things?
Yeah, like I think a lot of my backstory, and that's just kind of the nature of probably why we got so far in this relationship already. But, for anybody that may be listening to this, I think my biggest problems or profits story is just not meeting my dad and then having a single mom that had to go to work. Well, she was single for at least a while and had to go to work and like bust her ass off. And in the process of that, it was, as I've already kind of mentioned or hinted at, like I had to live largely with my grandparents because they just had the time to take care of me. And that was actually probably the greatest profit I ever could have found in that situation, because, I learned from multiple generations there. So like there's different generations now teaching you different sets of values, right? Like everybody knows that generation of people that were born, say in the late 50s, have different sets of values and different ways of looking at the world than people that were born in, say, the mid 70s, like my mom was. So I got exposed to way different versions of the world and way different versions of how to think. Some of those were exceptional. Some of them were limiting belief inspiring, right? Like, for example, my grandparents have zero debt. Zero. It's the devil. Where my mother would probably have, significant debt. And so the contrast there is probably where the profits lie, right? It's identifying like, oh, there's actually something beautiful I can take away from both of these people and leverage into a victory. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. Another one that I've always found to be one of the greatest profits that set me on this course was during my university experience. And Matt, you will already know this too, but during my university experience, electing to do my first co-op term doing door-to-door sales. I was absolutely criticized by everybody. Everybody in my life was like, what are you doing, man? Like, that does not sound like what my degree was eloquently titled International Business Management. Okay, that does not sound like a Bachelor of Business Administration task, right? So that certainly was a difficult decision for me. It also had me move from Ontario to Saskatchewan for the entire summer. So I was in Saskatchewan and Alberta, going everywhere. So like north to south, covered the whole province, of Saskatchewan and got to go door to door in a lot of beautiful cities. And like, that was probably the ultimate life-changing experience to that point in my life, where I understood like, wow, okay, like doing hard things is really important, because I learned so much about rejection, about just being mentally resilient, about adversity, right? About how like making money, and then like the classic burnout when you make money and then blow it all and then stall out and zero for a while. Like, I learned a lifetime of sales lessons in one summer, which was badass. So that's probably another one of my biggest problems or profit stories.
Absolutely. I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit more. So in this door-to-door sales position, and given that it was very abnormal by the sounds of it to your peers in the same exact program, what allowed you to make that decision? And to build off of that as well, what were the actual lessons that you learned from doing that type of grinding task of door-to-door sales?
Well, I think what allowed me to do it was a childlike optimism of the world. You know, I listened to the recruiter who told me that it's going to be easy. We're going to be making 6 figures plus in the first month. You're going to be driving around on Sea-Doos when we go out to the company adventure thing. You know, you're going to get to travel Canada and have a lot of nice things. And of course, they had outside at that outside they had, you know, his GTR and his beautiful car, and he was wearing a nice watch and nice suit and all this good stuff. So like, you know, all of those things were very attractive to 20 what, I don't even know how old I was, but I was like very early 20s, right? Like I would have been like 21 or 22 or even maybe 20. And so like, I was like just so captivated by that abundance and what could be possible there. And so that is what largely drew me in. But the lessons learned were incredible, because it turns out it's actually really hard to do a lot of business in that way. Like if you want to go door to door, I had to knock roughly 1,000 doors before I got a yes, right? And this is probably one of the greatest lessons right away was to trust your mentors there. I had a great mentor named Shane Barry, and he would go out with me on the doors, and he was a veteran. Like he'd been doing this for 7, maybe 10 years. Like he was actually a vet in the game, and he had made a lot of money. And he was also the one making these big promises, right? But he was also the one out there at night that would be out there door knocking with me all day, and then the sun would go down, we're still door knocking when a lot of the other guys were hanging out at the Tim Hortons or the local. There's always a Chinese restaurant in every small town. It's the craziest thing, but like, it doesn't matter where you are, there's always one of those. So they'd be hanging out there midday, or some of them would be caught going to like the movie theater midday. And like Shane and I were just burning out the soles in our shoes and the knuckles on our hands, freaking door knocking. And he'd come pick me up, you know, long after the sun went down, and we would go and eat together. And we started getting the same hotel rooms, because the guys would all have to go and get spaces. And so I buddied up with him. We stayed in the same hotels every day, and every moment of the day we were training. We were doing drills, we were practicing the pitch, we were practicing objections, and we were going over all the fundamentals that would be required to actually make some money in that business and to learn about sales in general. So yeah, that was my biggest lesson, was like, when there's mentorship, you have to take advantage of it. You have to stay close to that person and listen, right? He was doing deals left, right, and center. I was knocking hypothetically the same doors, right? Because a lot of people will blame the door or blame the market or blame the sale. It's not the sale. It's not the door. It's not the market. It's you, okay? You haven't trained enough. Or you're missing something, right? So I would figure out like, what did you do to get that deal, man? Because I knocked 100 doors today and I couldn't find a single deal. And so that was a big lesson right there. It's just the resilience and consistency. I think that was the biggest thing. It's like, you have to be consistent and persistent, or you don't get results.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. It's we've talked about before, but that discipline and hard work, or that work ethic, that hunger, is something, I think it's the only thing that really can't be taught. Almost everything else can be taught. Again, I think maybe through osmosis, you can pick up on that work ethic, but it's not something where you can just pick up a textbook and understand work ethic. So I guess one other question, or maybe more of a concept I want to explore with you, Adam, that I think all humans to a degree have this, but I've definitely noticed it with you, and I'd like to attribute it to myself as well. And it's kind of a problems or profits mentality when looking kind of at your past, in the present, or any situation or story you could tell, and choosing to tell that story through a more positive lens rather than through a negative lens. So, like, I don't know, there's 1,000 different examples I could throw out there, but I'd love just to hear, do you think that's a perspective you've always had? Is that a perspective you've learned with time? Is it something that one gains with wisdom and experience? What are your thoughts?
My mind went somewhere deep there when you started saying this. Like,
Let's go.
I don't know, man. Like, I actually think that at a very young age, I started telling myself interesting stories about what was going on. Like, why would I not have a dad there when some of my friends would, right? Like, if I looked around at some of my friends' father figures, like, they were fantastic, right? Like, they would go out and do like sailing together and hiking and all these crazy adventures. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. What an interesting experience for that individual. And so I think I would just, I think I told myself the story I wanted to hear long enough that it became the truth. Where I literally just created my reality that, like, this is better. This is actually an opportunity that I get to grow up and spend so much time with my grandparents and learn from them and their friends. It's a huge opportunity that I get to now view life through a different lens, where somewhere in high school, I recognized that I didn't have one father. I had all of my friends and my stepdad and my grandparents that I could actually be consciously aware of. So like in high school, I started thinking, maybe like Brent Kratz, my friend Gavin's father, like maybe he is part of my dad, right? Maybe Joey Griggs is part of my dad experience, right? And I started kind of being very aware and not taking for granted the experiences that I saw my friends having, and then the experiences that they, you know, whether out of pity or whatever, it, you know, brought me into, right? Like I would go hiking on the family trip with the Kratzes. I would go and I still do every single year, I'll go to Christmas Eve at my friend Matthew's house because his family I grew up there, right? They love me. So it was a very interesting experience. And I just kept telling myself the story that, you know, this was actually a huge advantage for me, and that most people will never get to experience it because they are so blinded by what they have inherently that they don't think about it, right? Like you don't actually miss the things that you have, right? You don't really think about the things that you have. You take them for granted quite a bit. And when you don't have them, they actually become considerably more valuable. So that's something that I've been telling myself forever. And I really do believe that the stories you tell, the things that you allow, both internally, your internal monologue, and the things that you say out loud are both, they're real, they're true. So if you say, I had a shitty experience because I didn't have that dad growing up, yeah, you probably did, because you would not have created the same opportunities, right? You would not have taken into context the different lessons learned and things that you had or didn't have. And so I've been telling myself this story forever, and sometimes I'll stretch the truth to myself, right? Sometimes I tell myself that it's a lot better than it might have been. But I don't even know now, because I've told myself the story so often that it just is true. And so I think that is very important as we start thinking about how our businesses grow, because they are that child who can be so easily influenced by its thoughts and environment, right? Like, so inside the company now, it's like, what stories do we tell and what do we allow to be talked about, because it's big, like it's important.
And how do we share those stories, and under what lighting or what narrative or context do we provide? I think that's really important. So I was originally going to take this in a different direction, but because you brought up the business side of things, like obviously I'm obsessed with company culture and all that stuff. And one of the things that I know we spend, I think, more time than probably a lot of people realize is talking about the culture, where our team members' headspace is at, where we think their attitudes are, what the context of why behind it, right? So not just like this person's a dick or he's decided to become a dick or he's now a dick. It's more like what story is behind this, right? And I think that part of that, like just hearing you talk about, you know, choosing to tell a narrative a certain way to yourself, I definitely view myself as doing similarly. I wonder if everyone does that, or whether that's something maybe unique to the people that are more profits oriented, where we're constantly telling stories and revisiting those stories and maybe tweaking some of the things, right? Like, I didn't really want to do that thing anyways, because it gave me a chance to go do this other thing. Or like, man, I probably wasn't ready for that anyways. So like, I just need to prep more and like next year I'll make it, or whatever the case may be. But I think so few people do that. But even in business, there's so many ways we could tell a story. A key employee quits. How do you share that news with the team? It can just be like, hey, Bob is a fucking dick. He left us in the lurch here. You know, fuck Bob. It's going to be really hard without Bob. We're going to have to plow through this. Or it can be like, hey guys, this came to me as a leader, as a wake-up call that Bob left. And like, I realized that the ship's got off course and it's time to really, you know, set things right. We need to have open, clear communication, transparency, trust, all those things. So I guess for people that maybe right now struggle having a negative narrative in their head all the time, where it's like, that asshole just cut me off. I can't believe she just said that to me. How could they not ask me how I'm doing? You know, any tips, tricks, or insights in regards to how we can try and better control our inner narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things to understand is like, you know, most of us just aren't even that important. So like literally nobody wakes up and thinks like, I'm going to go out of my way to ruin this person's day. So like, there's just so many things that can happen in a day. And like, I find myself doing this sometimes too, where I'll get frustrated or angry or upset about something that's just kind of happened in my life. And it's just like, fuck, why am I getting mad about this? Like, and you know, this is like tangential as hell, but I recently got a Whoop strap. Okay. It's this activity tracker, or whatever you want to call it, that essentially tracks your activity, your strain level, your recovery level, sleep level during the day. And I noticed something very obvious about when I'm not recovered and when I have not had a full sleep, like I'm not well rested. I'm far more easy to become irritable or frustrated or lack, you know, emotional intelligence to just de-escalate a situation and find a solution in it. And so I think it's very important that at all stages of life and throughout any given day, you really do remain conscious that like somebody might have literally just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And so they're not like fully thinking through their actions and the consequences that it'll have on you. And for the most part, most people aren't trying to ruin your day. They're just going about doing their thing, right? It's like the classic, you know, there's always more traffic when you're in a rush, right? When you've got to be somewhere in 10 minutes, there's always every red light, right? Like it's just kind of the nature of how things work. And more than likely those red lights and that traffic was always there. It's just when you weren't in a rush, it didn't matter. And so I think that's why, you know, it's very important to try your very best to avoid the victim mentality of like, these things are happening to me. Right? Things should not happen to you. They should happen through you. And I think that's something to really focus on, is like, as things are happening to you, just checking your ego for a minute and detaching from the situation and thinking, you know, is this going to matter to me? This is an exercise I do all the time. Will this matter to me in 2 months? Okay. If something that's happening right now is going to matter in 2 months, it might be very important that I react in a certain way. But if it's going to be one of those interactions, like somebody cutting you off in traffic, there's not a chance you're going to remember that in 2 months, unless it becomes a memorable occasion by you escalating the situation and chasing the person down and honking and giving them the finger or whatever. So I think it's very important to maintain that level of sanity, because if you don't, then it just it allows chaos to come into your life, and chaos is only really good when you're trying to think of like brainstorming activities. So that's the only time it's useful. So I think just maintaining that emotional intelligence, stop, detach, ask yourself for a second, orient yourself and ask, is this going to matter in 2 months or not? And if so, why am I angry about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to go down that pathway a little bit further, Adam, because you're really touching on some important points, I think, about extreme ownership really over your day and also over your health. This is something that you've explored quite extensively with taking extreme ownership over all elements of your life. And I would love to go down that even further. And can you tell us some really needle moving areas that you would recommend focusing on as an entrepreneur or as a investor or business owner that are really key when it comes to either mindset or physical well-being or health that really move the needle in that positive direction to go into your day with that positive outlook?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. And actually today I've just been writing my first book, which is called Liftoff. And it really covers the topic of like, how do you launch a business? And the first chapter is really just about getting yourself figured out, right? Just like in order to achieve liftoff, there's a lot of gravity. There's a lot of things trying to hold you back. There's a lot of anchors. So there's a few things in your life that you're going to have to absolutely achieve control over very quickly. Easiest thing to do, control your well-being, right? So getting adequate sleep, whatever that looks like for you. Okay, for me, it's like 6 to 7 hours. As long as I get that, I'm pretty sharp throughout the whole day. Okay, you need that sleep to maintain clarity and focus throughout the day and have the energy to do complex problem solving when your team needs you, because problems come up at all hours of the day, right? We've figured this out. There could be problems at 10 p.m. You need to be sharp at 10 p.m. if that thing needs to get solved. Okay, your business and your life depend on it. The other thing is just managing your diet and moving your body. This is one of the easiest things. The reason why all three of these things are so important to manage right away is they're all directly in your control. Okay, this is not up to the government. This is not up to some regulatory body or your neighbor or your friends and family. This is completely reliant on your self-discipline. So eating right, okay, cut the sugar out, get rid of all the nonsense in your life that's not adding value, and then move your body, right? And this is simple, like, starting with walks or jogs or light movements, yoga, whatever it is to intentionally move your body, just to shake off the cobwebs and again, be able to maintain consistent focus throughout the day. And that's probably going to look different for everybody, but I'm 26 years old. It's important for me to move my body during the day or I will become lazy and fat. And I attribute a lot of negative habits to those things. Like I feel like people with bad habits inherently have worse off businesses. Like even those that have bad habits and decent businesses, they could have better businesses if they just worked on themselves a little bit as well. And when you pair that with massive action, right, and actually doing the hard things, like that's where you actually start winning externally. So I think those things are all really important. And then of course, there's always the conversation to be had about what's your environment like, right? So that's kind of the next thing outside of your body. The next thing to change is your environment, right? You got to manage the people and the media that you're consuming and who's telling you what stories. Because the second most important story after the one you're telling yourself is the one that you're allowing others to tell you, right? That's where, like, if you let the wrong people tell you the wrong stories long enough, you'll start believing them. So that's kind of the next step in making positive changes for you so that you can enact positive change for your business.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely love it, Adam. And so last thing I kind of want to chat with you about is problems into profits. So what's a problem right now that you're encountering, a problem that maybe you're ignoring or you just haven't dealt with yet or you haven't solved? Where is there currently an opportunity that you see?
That's probably the hardest question yet, because I like to think that we solve problems fairly quickly, but Yeah, I guess one of the more interesting challenges that I'm faced with right now is that we're at the most eloquent and beautiful time that ever has existed for both technology and market conditions and regulatory freedom and everything in that sense in our industry of the business that I'm running. So we're obviously doing real estate wholesaling for anybody that doesn't know. And, you know, to me, this is absolutely the Goldilocks zone of where this industry will ever be. Like it's the most favorable conditions I think we'll ever see. And so one of my current challenges that I'm actively seeking mentorship, advice, solutions on is that, you know, I've got a team of very motivated individuals that are salespeople, and we've got a really stable foundation underneath them, which are our admin staff and the people that make sure all the details get handled. But I've also got this challenge where I feel like there's a tidal wave of business, and I don't feel like we're capturing even the most minor fraction of it. And we are sort of industry leaders even. And I find that to be an interesting statement when I look at how we're leading, right? Like we're actually not capturing the majority of the market. And so when I think of the best businesses out there, most of them run as, and they'll never let you say this, but most of them run like monopolies, okay? Or like there's a couple other players. What is this, an oligopoly? I can't remember.
Yeah, like an oligarchy or something like that.
Oligarchy, yeah, whatever the word is. But anyways, when there's just a couple companies, and like that's how the best businesses run because they don't have competition. And right now, I feel like our company is in a position where it could easily have real competition. We're not monopoly power states yet. And so I think one of the biggest challenges for me is trying to reconcile the reality of how people actually work from like just a human condition perspective and the growth of the business. Like how fast and how far do you take the business without incurring unintended consequences versus going deep on the team that you've got, right? Or on the structure that you've got. Maybe not even necessarily the team, but the business model that you have. So it's been a very enlightening process, just thinking about solutions here. It's been an enlightening process, taking the time to actually write this book because it's forcing me to put onto paper what I know to be truths. But what if I ask myself, honestly, if I was practicing the truth that I'm putting to paper, if I'm actually doing those things? And some of them, it's just no, right? Like some of them I would have to say, no, I'm not following my own advice on some of these things. So I really do believe that the answers are always going to be simple. And, you know, some of the things that I've put on paper for this book absolutely answer my problem, right? They tell me exactly what I should do. And these are things that I know, but I don't know, it's so easy to get caught working in the business rather than working on it. And I think that's the biggest actual problem here. It's not that my team doesn't perform. In fact, they perform pretty well. It's the fact that if I don't spend the right amount of time working on things that really matter, like growth strategies and figuring out how to drive new revenue streams and how to drive capturing more of this market, it just doesn't inherently happen, right? And so that's another one of those truths, like about culture and about businesses and just people in general. We don't just grow. In fact, we actually just sort of slowly die if left unchecked. So, yeah, that's a deep one. That was the deepest of all of them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Adam. I think just a few thoughts that I can't help myself adding to it, and then we'll wrap up. But I think sometimes people underestimate the intimidation that can come from not having competition and being in a blue ocean, that the stress of seeing a huge opportunity and not making as much progress as you'd like, because it can literally feel like whatever, pick your what you want, but like you walk into Eden, but you've got no baskets and you're like, this is awesome, but like I can only carry so much fruit, so many apples, so much whatever. And I actually need to like, stop just trying to grab with both hands and maybe like build a plan, take my time, like come together with a real roadmap here. And it can be panic inducing almost at times where you're just like, man, I just need to like do it. Like someone else is going to catch on to this. Like there's no moat, there's no any protection here. It's just literally wide open. It's an unwalled city. And I just happen to be the first here. And I think sometimes people spend way too much time working in the business, hoping that they can literally just pick every tree bare before anyone else comes into the city. And it's rare that that's going to happen. It's actually not necessarily the first mover advantage. It's like the first person that gets in there, like you said, and can really dominate and carve out real market share.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. There's so much truth in there. And yeah, I think, it's a tough problem. And like, honestly, it is not really as widely talked about. Like, it's not as often that we find ourselves in a situation where you have the opportunity to grab a monopoly and you have to then figure out how to. Most often there is some sort of monopoly that you're trying to compete with. And that's where a lot of the business talks and business books are largely oriented. But the thing about, finding yourself looking at a potential situation where you can grab so much opportunity is like, everyone else will easily look at that as well, right? Like, it's not as if those opportunities last a very long time. And we also do suffer in our industry from one of the easiest things for people to figure out in business, which is just low levels of barrier to entry. There's almost none. In fact, I don't think there is any really. There's not many. There's force multipliers that we take advantage of. Like, we've already achieved some revenue, and so therefore we can actually afford to outmarket some of our competitors and generally outpace some of the newest guys. But it's not to the degree that somebody couldn't catch us at this point. And so that, I think, is probably one of my biggest challenges and concerns that I do think about. And yeah, I'm really excited that I've taken the last kind of few days to just buckle down, put my phone on do not disturb, and really think about some of these challenges and get them on paper for kind of the world to see. And you think differently when it's sort of the Hawthorne effect at work here, where you behave differently when other people are observing you. And so I guess one of the challenges that I gave myself is I just gave you a deadline for when I was going to do my stuff. I missed the first one, naturally, you always do, but I gave myself a second deadline and like, hey, you can't miss two. That's ridiculous. And so, I'm going to meet that deadline, no problem. And that's, one of those interesting things. I just like force myself into a situation where there's no real out. Okay, so just do the hard work. And that's usually where the solutions lie. It's just doing the thing, even if it sucks.
Absolutely. I really like that concept, Adam, of creating the constraint for yourself, because in a ocean of opportunities, it can feel really overwhelming. And as someone myself that, in school would always wait till the deadline to do the work or procrastinate, for me, I know I need to create those constraints in any opportunity that I find myself in. And it seems like you've really touched on that in a big way here, Adam, is in the industry that we're in a really unregulated market space, and where there's not any real huge competitor that's monopolizing the industry right now. Creating those constraints and those timelines for you in everything that you're doing can be a really effective strategy and tool for any sort of business owner, or even in health and fitness. So having those deadlines and constraints that you create for yourself, I think that's a really great thought construct to bring up here. So is there, just to close off here, is there anything else that you would say, Adam, that is really important to touch on this topic, or any other problems that you would really like to explore here that you've turned into a profit?
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. Like, I think one of the most important things that I do on a daily basis to manage the problems or profits thing is just have really clear and defined goals in front of me. So a lot of the times the easiest scoreboard is financially, setting financial goals or something that's easily measurable, like a financial goal. So that could work for fitness goals or anything else. But I have to do those because inherently I'm actually a really lazy person. Like, if given the option, I will do nothing. And so if I don't set these goals for myself and I don't put myself under certain amounts of pressure, like, there's absolutely zero chance I'll do anything. Like, I am literally one of the laziest people ever. Like, I will not work out. I will not do the work, like do whatever, if I don't give myself these types of constraints and these types of things. And the final thing to add to that is accountability. Right? One of the reasons why our company works so fantastically and has gotten this far is because we are holding ourselves to daily accountability throughout our entire team. And I think that's really important because I will give up on myself long before I'll give up on one of my teammates, right? Like, I will absolutely not do the thing for myself way before I would ever not do the thing for Matt, right? Like, I just know that. Like, that's a fact. And so I find that having that mentor, having that friend, having that business partner, having that coworker, having whoever you've got to hold yourself accountable with, like, that is honestly one of the biggest key success factors that I would say has gotten us this far. And that drives me every single day, right? Like, I'm not going to give up on anything, even when it sucks. Like, you know, when I'm super tired and I'm just like really frustrated with how the results are going at the moment or with how something's working out in the business, like, I don't just give up and stop at that point, because I know if I do, it's likely to result in a lot of other people not getting what I've promised them, or not getting to their goal, or not getting to do a lot of the things that they've discussed with us as a team. One of our core values is truth. So, you know, we recently did an exercise where we went in depth into everybody's why, right? And so there's some super emotional stuff in there. There's some really important things to a lot of people on the team. And I know if I don't show up, like, I'm putting some of that stuff at jeopardy. So that's really important to hold yourself to that really high standard, is when other people are depending on you, and when you want to be accountable to somebody else. Like, the disappointment of not doing something for Matt, or not having it done for the business partner or for that person in your life that matters to you, like, that's so much more valuable than as a motivational tactic for yourself than, like, you know, just like, oh, I didn't go to the gym today, there's always tomorrow. It's like, well, man, there is no tomorrow. Just get after it. So it's way easier when you have accountability. So that's probably the last thing I'll add for you guys here. So thank you guys so much for having me on.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, Adam. And everyone at home, you guys can follow along with Adam on social media at AdamJDMartin.
Whew, it's got a ring.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, guys.
Problems are what? Problems are profits!